The gun was a cheap-looking revolver, the kind you see in old detective movies. But in the shaking, sweaty hand of a terrified man playing cop, it looked as big and as deadly as a cannon. It was pointed directly at my son's chest. My son David, who had come home to me for a few precious days of peace, stood perfectly, unnervingly still in our own driveway. His hands were held slightly out to his sides, palms open, a gesture of calm de-escalation that was so completely at odds with the frantic, screaming chaos unfolding around him. "He's the one. He's the threat. He's been threatening us," shrieked Cynthia, the president of our Homeowners Association. She was standing beside her husband Gary, the man with the gun, urging him on. Her voice a shrill symphony of manufactured panic and real vicious triumph. "Gary, do your job. You're the security coordinator. Detain him. He's probably armed." Gary, his face pale and glistening with sweat, his eyes wide with a dangerous, intoxicating mixture of fear and adrenaline, took a shaky step forward. He was living out a fantasy, and my son, my only child, was trapped in the middle of it. "Don't move," he yelled, his voice cracking with a pathetic puberty-like squeak. "I am ordering you not to move. Put your hands on your head." I was watching from the open garage door, my body frozen in a state of pure, primal terror that only a parent can know. My heart felt like it had seized in my chest, a cold, hard knot of ice. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not in this quiet, manicured suburban sanctuary. Not to my David, who had dedicated his life to a world of real danger, only to face it here at home. They were going to kill him right here in our driveway over a stupid, imaginary rule. And that's when everything went wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. What would you do if this happened to you? And subscribe to HOA Files. To understand that moment of absolute heart-stopping madness, you have to understand the 6 months of quiet, suffocating misery that led up to it. My name is Helen. I was a high school history teacher for 40 years. My life has been one of predictable, comforting routines. After my husband Mark passed away last year, after a long and brutal fight with cancer, those routines became my anchor in a sea of grief. I lived in our quiet, peaceful house in the Willow Creek Estates community, the house we had bought together 30 years ago. I gardened. I read. I tried to navigate the strange, silent landscape of my new life. My son David is my whole world. He's a good man, a quiet man. When he was a boy, he was always the one who would stand up to bullies on the playground, not with his fists, but with a calm, steady presence that seemed to deflate them. He chose a path that worried me every single day. I tell my neighbors, he has a demanding job in federal law enforcement. It's the truth, but it's a pale, washed-out version of the real truth. David is a deputy United States Marshal. His life is spent hunting the most dangerous fugitives in the country, protecting federal judges, and walking into situations that would give most people nightmares. He's quiet about his work. He never talks about it. But I see it in his eyes. When he comes home, watchfulness, a stillness that never quite goes away. God, he had a rare week of leave coming, and he was spending it with me. He said he was coming to help me finally sort through Mark's workshop in the garage, a task I hadn't been able to face alone. But I knew the real reason. He was coming to check on his mom. Willow Creek Estates, the place I had once considered a peaceful haven, had changed in the years since Mark's death. A new HOA board had been elected, led by Cynthia and her husband Gary. Cynthia was a woman who lived for control. Her world was a tiny, perfect kingdom of manicured lawns and identical beige mailboxes, and she was its absolute monarch. Gary, her husband, was her willing enforcer. He was a man who had failed to become a real police officer in his youth and had been trying to cosplay as one ever since. He had appointed himself the HOA security coordinator. It patrolled our safe, quiet streets in a golf cart with a flashing amber light on the roof, and he openly carried a handgun on his hip, a fact that made my blood run cold every time I saw it. They were a toxic cocktail of paranoia and power, a two-person regime dedicated to enforcing the most trivial of rules with the seriousness of a national security crisis. And with my husband, Mark, who had always been the one to handle their nonsense, is now gone, I had become Cynthia's new favorite project. A few weeks before David was due to arrive, Cynthia pushed through a new, deeply invasive guest registration and vetting policy. Citing a non-existent crime wave, she declared that any guest staying for more than 48 hours had to be pre-registered with her and had to present themselves at her home, the community office, with a photo ID too. Be vetted for the safety of the community. It was a breathtaking overreach, but she ruled through fear, and most of my neighbors just quietly complied. The trouble started the moment David arrived. His car, a standard government issue, dark blue sedan, was apparently too suspicious for Gary's keen security eye. Gary actually blocked the road with his golf cart, forcing David to stop. He strode up to David's window and began to question him. "State your name and your business in this community," Gary had demanded, his hand resting on his holstered pistol. David, who has dealt with actual, dangerous criminals his entire career, just looked at him with a kind of weary patience. "I'm here to see my mother." At number 12, he then simply drove around the golf cart and pulled into my driveway. My phone rang less than 2 minutes later. It was Cynthia. "Helen," she said, her voice dripping with a false syrupy concern. "You have an unregistered visitor. A man in a very suspicious-looking vehicle. You know the rules. He needs to come to the community office immediately to be vetted." "Cynthia," I said, my voice tired. "That's my son, David. He's here to visit me. He's not going to be vetted. That is an unacceptable breach of protocol," she snapped, the sweetness instantly vanishing. "He is an unknown male. For all we know, he could be a criminal. His refusal to register is a direct threat to our safety." She hung up. The first violation notice was taped to my front door the next morning. It was a $100 fine for failure to register a guest. Attached was a formal, condescending letter reminding me that unvetted individuals are considered a security risk to the community, and that my cooperation in maintaining our safe environment is not optional. The next day, David and I started the difficult, emotional work of cleaning out my late husband's workshop in the garage. It was a hot day, and we had the garage door open. David was in an old paint-splattered t-shirt and sweats, his face covered in a thin layer of dust. We were just two people, a mother and a son, quietly sorting through a lifetime of memories, and then the golf cart appeared. Cynthia and Gary. They parked on the street directly across from our driveway and just sat there and watched. For almost an hour, not saying a word, just staring. It was a blatant, chilling act of intimidation. Later that evening, an email arrived from Cynthia. Subject line was, "Official Community Security Alert." It was a notice to the entire neighborhood, warning residents of suspicious activity. At my address, it described a large, unknown male moving bulk items in a furtive manner. It was a public shaming, a digital wanted poster for my own son. For the crime of helping his widowed mother clean her garage, the fear in my gut was starting to curdle into a slow-burning anger. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. They were treating my son, a man who dedicates his life to upholding the law, like a common criminal. I wanted to fight back, to scream at them, but I was grieving and exhausted. I didn't know how. The next day, Cynthia confronted me at the mailbox. Her eyes were alight with a crusader's zeal. "Helen," she said, her voice low and conspiratorial. "Several of the neighbors are very concerned. They've seen your son walking around the neighborhood. He doesn't smile. He doesn't wave. He just watches everything. He looks dangerous. Doesn't fit here. We have a right to know who is in our community. We have a right to feel safe. He's my son, Cynthia," I said, my voice shaking. "He's a good man. He's here on a short leave to help me. He's quiet. That's his way." "It's not a way we are comfortable with," she said, her voice turning to steel. "This is his final warning. Either he comes to my office and registers by tomorrow morning, or I will have him declared a trespasser and removed from this community. We have a zero-tolerance policy for individuals who refuse to comply with our security protocols." This was it. She had crossed a line from petty, bureaucratic harassment to a direct personal threat against my child. I went inside and told David everything. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a deep, weary anger that he quickly suppressed. He was quiet for a long time. "Okay, Mom," he finally said, his voice impossibly calm. "Don't worry. Don't talk to them anymore. Let her make her move. Just, whatever happens, stay calm. And make sure you have your phone ready to record." The final confrontation came the next day. We were in the driveway, loading boxes of Mark's old tools into the back of David's car to take to Goodwill. It was a sad, quiet task, another small step in the long, painful process of saying goodbye. And then the golf cart came flying around the corner, screeching to a halt and blocking us in. Cynthia and Gary, they both got out. Gary, looking nervous and important, strode to the front of the cart, his hand resting on his holstered pistol. Cynthia marched towards us, a look of grim determination on her face. "This is your last warning," she announced, her voice ringing out in the quiet cul-de-sac. "He has failed to register. He is now an unauthorized individual. He needs to get in his car and leave this community. Now." "We're just loading our car, Cynthia," I said, my heart starting to pound. "We'll be done in a few minutes." "No," she said. "He leaves now, or he will be removed." David, who had been leaning against his car, slowly straightened up. He looked at Gary, and then at Cynthia. "Ma'am," he said, his voice even and steady. "You and your husband are on my mother's private property. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "He's being hostile," Cynthia shrieked, taking a dramatic step back as if he had lunged at her. "He's a threat to us, Gary. Do your job. Protect your community." And that's when Gary, egged on by his wife's hysteria, his mind clouded with his own pathetic hero fantasies, did the unthinkable. He drew his weapon. He unholstered his cheap revolver and pointed it with a shaking hand directly at my son's chest. And that's how we ended up in a standoff, a mother's worst nightmare. A moment of pure, unadulterated terror, watching my son, a man who has survived actual war zones, being held at gunpoint in our own driveway by a delusional wannabe cop. I was frozen, a silent scream trapped in my throat. But David was not. His entire body went still, but it was not the stillness of fear. It was the stillness of a predator. He slowly, deliberately raised his hands, palms open and facing forward, a universal sign of non-aggression. Eyes which had been calm were now 2 chips of ice, locked onto Gary's. His voice, when he spoke, was a different voice. It was not my David's voice. It was the voice of a man who was accustomed to absolute command. A deep, calm, resonant baritone that cut through the hysterical noise like a surgeon's scalpel. "Sir," he said, his gaze unwavering, "you are currently pointing a loaded firearm at me. That is a felony known as aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. You are committing a very serious crime. You need to lower your weapon right now." Gary, high on adrenaline and Cynthia's screeching, was beyond reason. "I am the security coordinator for this community," he yelled, his voice cracking. "I am authorized to use force to detain a hostile subject. Show me your hands. Get on the ground." "My hands are visible," David said, his voice still impossibly calm. "And you are not a police officer. You have no authority here. You have about 5 seconds to lower that weapon before you make a mistake that will ruin the rest of your life." "He's threatening you, Gary," Cynthia screamed. "He's a criminal. I knew it." Just as Gary's finger tightened on the trigger, the sound of multiple real sirens filled the air. A neighbor, a quiet man who I knew was a veteran, had seen Gary pull the gun and had immediately called 911. 2 county sheriff's patrol cars came screaming around the corner and slid to a halt, their lights painting the scene in frantic, chaotic flashes of red and blue. 2 deputies burst out, their own weapons drawn, moving with a speed and professionalism that made Gary look like a clumsy, terrified child. "Sheriff's office." "Drop the weapon. Drop it now," senior deputy bellowed, his voice a thunderclap of real authority. Gary froze, his face a mask of panicked confusion. The fantasy was over. This was real. He dropped his gun as if it had burned his hand. It clattered onto the asphalt. The deputies swarmed him instantly, shoving him against my car and cuffing his hands behind his back with a brutal efficiency. Cynthia just stood there, her mouth open in a silent scream. As the other deputies secured her, the senior officer, a tall sergeant with a grim mustached face, then turned to David, his own weapon still held at a low ready. "Sir, are you all right? We received a report of a man being held at gunpoint." David gave a slow, single nod, his body finally relaxing slightly. "I'm okay, Sergeant. Thank you for the prompt response." Sir, if you don't mind," the sergeant said, his voice now calm and professional, "I'm going to need to see some identification." "Of course," David said. He moved with a deliberate, fluid economy, no wasted motion. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out his wallet, and handed it to the sergeant. The sergeant took the wallet. He opened it, and then he just froze. He stared down at the wallet in his hand. His eyes went wide. He looked from the wallet to my son's calm, stoic face, and then back to the wallet. A wave of dawning, horrified comprehension washed over his features. Carefully closed the wallet and handed it back, his entire demeanor changing in an instant from a professional cop to something else entirely. Something that looked a lot like awe. He cleared his throat. "Sir," he said, his voice now full of a deep, almost reverential respect. "My apologies. I didn't realize." He then turned his head and looked at the cuffed, whimpering Gary, and then at the hysterical Cynthia. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated contempt. "You two," he said, his voice dripping with disgust, "are under arrest for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and false imprisonment. And you," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl as he looked at Gary, "you just pulled a gun on a deputy United States Marshal." He then turned to me, and for the first time, I understood. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now gentle, "your son is going to be just fine." The arrest of Cynthia and Gary for holding a deputy U.S. Marshal at gunpoint became the single biggest scandal in the history of Willow Creek Estates. Gary was facing a raft of state charges, but David's office, the U.S. Marshal's Service, took a very keen interest in the case. They opened their own federal investigation into the incident, specifically into the pattern of harassment and intimidation that led up to it. The HOA was disgraced. The story, with all of its insane, dramatic details, hit the local news. The board was forced to resign in shame. The entire community was mortified. My son, my David, was, of course, the picture of calm throughout the entire ordeal. He gave a full, professional, and devastatingly factual statement to the investigators. He was the victim, but he acted like a cooperating witness, a professional doing his job. We spent the rest of his leave in the peace and quiet I had wanted for him all along. We finished cleaning out the garage, sat on the porch, and talked for hours. We grieved for my husband, together. It was the normal, precious father-son time that I had been so afraid we would never get again. This whole ugly, terrifying chapter taught me a lesson. People who crave power, who dress up in cheap costumes and give themselves important-sounding titles, are just playing a game. Their children and adult bodies, building forts of rules and regulations to make themselves feel important and strong. Gary and Cynthia thought they were confronting some suspicious thug who didn't belong in their perfect, sterile world. They had no idea they were threatening a man who represents the full, quiet, and unshakable power of the federal justice system. They had no idea that his calmness under fire wasn't fear. It was a deeply ingrained training that was the only thing that kept their stupid, pathetic lives from ending right there in my driveway. Gary and Cynthia are facing years in prison. And the civil lawsuit I filed against the HOA will ensure they never have the power to terrorize another family again. But their son, a partner at a big DC lobbying firm, has just been appointed as the new interim HOA president to help the community navigate the ongoing legal challenges and to thoroughly review and strengthen all community security protocols and resident vetting procedures